Alright, everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of this series. What we're going to be doing next from here is implementing some juice. And so we're going to be talking about this in class as well, but there's this great video linked in the description I recommend you all watch, basically about implementing juice in your games and what juice is. So juice is anything that makes the game just feel good. And there are many examples of this that are really small things that you can do, but from a design perspective, really shape the way that a player feels the game. There are so many games where if you break it down objectively, all a person is doing is pressing one or two buttons, right? But it's everything else that makes it feel good. So how do we make this game feel good? Because you'll notice if you just play it like this, there's not much happening, right? So how do we get it to feel good? And one of the first things you turn to is actually sound design, which is really important. You don't notice how important it is until you start making a game and you notice that it is absolutely dead silent and nothing feels real, right? And no jumps feel like anything. There's no impact that feels like anything. So let's fix that. So here I have Audacity. Audacity is a great free program available on Mac and Windows. You can just search Audacity and download it. It's awesome, but it definitely has its quirks. It's a pretty decently old application that is constantly getting updated, but I have no idea what any of the updates do. It is used by musicians a lot for recording, but it's also used by me in my bedroom at 2 a.m. when I am making weird sounds for my video games. So let's do exactly that right now. So first, let's play the game and sort of imagine what sort of sounds could be in it. You could go out and you can download sounds for your game, which you should definitely do. I do that all the time as well. But I also like to make sounds myself. So let's just imagine we need a jump sound effect. We probably need a little bit of a walking sound effect. And maybe a little sound effect for when we crouch as well. So I've just come up with 3 little ideas there. But think about your game and what sounds you're going to need in your game. All I'm trying to do here is make the player feel interactive, make the player feel real, right? So let's do that. Let's open up Audacity, and you can choose your microphone here. So I have this microphone set up, and you can choose where your sound will play out here. And let's just go ahead and do it. So the way I like to do it is I like to layer sounds, and I like to just record sounds. And you'll be surprised at what sounds you can make if you're just creative with how you do it. But the first thing you need to do before you record any sounds is record some background audio, because what Audacity is really good at is noise reduction. So that's what we're going to be doing. So first I'm going to hit record and just sort of let it run. And that's about all you need. You don't need anything more than that. And now I'm just going to start making sounds, and we can reduce the background noise and just put it in the game. So let's do some jumping sounds. So, I'm just making noises. And I'm going to bang my desk to make some noises that way. I have a water bottle, I'll flick that. Maybe I'll flick the inside of my cheek. Alright, one of those will be a good option. And now let's do a walking sound effect. So what I like to do is I like to do just 2 sounds, and then I like to loop that. So that's just me hitting my chest. Let's see what else. What else is there? I'll lightly tap my cheek. Maybe desk. So you're just trying to get options, right? And then let's do a sort of impact sound. Oh, and let's do a sound for the crouch. Wow. Okay. So we'll hit this little square here to stop it. So, ton of noises. Definitely not going to use all of them, but what I like to do is scrub through and find the ones I like. But first, before we export any sounds, let's select this beginning section here and come up to Effect, and we'll do Noise Reduction. So it says select a few seconds of noise, so Audacity knows what to filter out. So we already have selected some stuff. So we'll click Get Noise Profile. Now it knows what our background noise sounds like. So what we're going to do now is select everything. So I just hit Control A to select everything. And it says step 2, select all the audio you want filtered, choose how much noise you want filtered out, and then click OK to reduce noise. So yeah, so I think the default is pretty good. So if I just hit OK, it'll apply it. And now let's test this. And that's about all you need. You don't need anything more than that. And yeah, so you should notice, I mean, there's pretty quickly very little background noise. If you want, you can run it a second time, which I sometimes do. You can just click noise reduction and click OK again. And that clears out just some of the smaller ones as well, or some of the larger noises. And then you're basically just going to scrub through your timeline, try and find the noises you like the most, and you're going to highlight them, and then we'll export those. So I'm going to go ahead and listen through this and find the ones I like. Okay, so I definitely like this sound right here. Let's do that one. So if I hold Control and then scroll, I can actually zoom in. We can see the waveform here. It's actually recording in stereo, which I don't mind. That's why there's 2 tracks here, but you probably should try to, unless you need stereo, which is like, stereo is when you have 2 different sounds for your different ears. Don't record stereo, but in this scenario, I'll just run with it. So I'll try to highlight at the beginning of the sound, as close to the beginning peak as possible, because you want there to be as little delay as possible, and then just try and get to the end. So if I hit play, it'll run through. And now what we're just going to do is come to File, Export, and what you're going to want to do is export selected audio. If you click these other exports, it'll export the entire thing, which we don't want. So we'll do Export Selected Audio. You can see here, last time I was doing this, I was storing a bunch of them. And just navigate to wherever you've got your files and your sounds in your game. And you can choose the file type you want to save it as. So there's WAV, MP3, and OGG. So WAV is massive, giant, uncompressed files. They suck. The very first game I made had a bunch of music tracks in it, all split up separately. And because I stored them as WAV files, the entire game was 60 gigabytes in size, which is crazy. So definitely don't do WAV. MP3 is great. It's compressed, but it takes a little bit to decompress it, and so it has a little bit of a delay when you play it back. OGG is the standard for game dev, which is a little unfortunate because there are a lot of default audio players that don't play OGG, but it's what I use, it's what I recommend. So do OGG Vorbis, and we're going to call our file whatever you want. So this one I'll just call bop. And then just keep scrubbing through and finding sounds, recording new sounds. The no, if you have to record anything new, you'll have to reapply the noise reduction. But just try and play around with it. There's also all sorts of effects built into Audacity you can mess around with. So for example, you could, click bass and treble. You could boost the bass if you wanted, or you could do like a filter curve. So if I select my audio track, you can choose what to filter out, and it'll apply an sort of a EQ to the different noise ranges. So you could like really compress, a certain section, and then make it higher in another. So you can get some fun effects like that. But just basically, you're just playing around with it. And what you can do also is you can add different tracks. So you could record another track on top, and you can, you can drag these audio tracks around and layer them on top of each other and make sound effects that way. Like I made a box break sound effect by tearing a sheet of paper, by hitting my desk, and by making a noise. And those three sounds combined made something really juicy, something very satisfying. So definitely mess around with it. Just sort of experiment and have fun. So here's another one. It looks pretty good. I'll do export selected audio. I'll call it smack. And yeah. So here, this is what I'll use in my walk sound effect. Basically, I just select the area, and I try to set it up so that if I imagine this sound looping, it'll loop sort of seamlessly. So that what I mean by that is that this highlight and these two peaks are roughly equidistant from the beginning and the end. So if I play it back a bunch, it'll go do-do-do-do-do-do-do. So we'll export this, and I'll call it walk. So now let's come back into Godot here, and if we come down in our file system, we'll see in sounds we have all our .ogg sounds. So let's get this in our game. So what I like to do is I like to anchor the sound to wherever it's coming from. The reason from this is that Godot has a built-in localized audio system. So like if you have a sound over here on the left side of the screen, it'll sound like it's on your left. If it's on the right, it'll localize the sound if somebody's listening with earbuds, which I think is just cool. So if I want sound effects to come from our raccoon, I can go ahead and add those on. So I'll just click on our character here, and then I'll go to Audio Stream Player 2D. So there's a 2D, there's a 3D, and there's a non-positional one. So if you want this to, if you wanted to have like a music track in your game, you would use this. If you want positional sound, you would use this. So let's add one of those, and let's go ahead and just double click this, and let's call it jump audio. Then we can right click and duplicate it, or hit Control D, and we'll call this other one crouch audio. And let's also do a walk audio. Okay, great. If we come to each of these and click on them, we'll see that we have an option here for stream, so we can just drag any of these in. So I think I like this bop sound, so we'll drag that in, and if we click play here, we can play it. So that sounds pretty good. You can mess with the pitch, which is sometimes useful if you want to make sound a little higher pitched and faster. This is also very useful for adding variation to your game. We'll get to that in a second. So just drag them all in. And so you can also adjust the volume. So like for example, this sound is pretty quiet. So you could either adjust the volume in Audacity, or you can adjust it in here. So it's in decibels, so if I hit 5, it'll be 5 decibels louder. Yeah. So now let's make our code control when these sounds are played. So we can, same way that we created references for our animation sprite, we can also create references for our audio. So I'm going to do that. Okay, so I just typed these all up. These are references, so same way, because this is a child of our, where the script is, we can just put it with like a $sign and then a reference like that. Okay, so we've got our references all set up here, just named however they're named, and with sort of the $sign to denote their children. If we come down here, we can make the audio work. And so basically you can put the audio wherever you think it would fit in your game. So for example, this little line of code here, if we press move up and we're on the floor, set our velocity to jump strength, this is our jump, right? So if we want to play our audio, then we should just put it here. So we'll do jump audio.play, and it's as simple as that. So if we run our game now, when we jump, our game is already starting to feel a lot more alive. So let's do that for the rest of this. So if our character is on the floor, not moving on the x-axis, but presses down, we play our crouch animation. Let's play our crouch audio too. But you'll notice something happens here. So let's try this out. Oh boy. That's not quite what we want. And so why that's happening is because every single frame we're calling the animate function, and every single frame it is playing the sound. And so what we want to do is first we have to check if the sound is playing. And that's really simple. We just do if crouch audio dot playing is false, play. Which now brings us to a different problem. It'll just keep playing, right? Because it'll play once, finish, and then play again. So what you're going to have to do here then is basically set up a variable to keep track of whether or not this is the first time we've crouched. So that's pretty simple to do. So what we'll do is we'll create a new variable. So we'll call this crouch audio played, and we'll set it to false by default. Then we'll come down here and basically create this little loop where if crouch audio.playing is false and crouch audio played is false, then we can play the audio and set crouch audio played to true. And so this will interrupt the cycle, and so it'll only play it once. But then we need to set this back to false for the cycle to continue. And so what we could do is we can put this somewhere where we're no longer crouching. So we could put this anywhere here. So if we're on the floor and we're not holding down, set it to false. And if we're on the floor and we're walking, we can set it false here as well. And here. So I basically just put this little line of code setting it back to false in scenarios where we're not crouching. So if we test this out now, it should go. And if I stand back up, I can do it again. If I walk, if I jump. Yeah. All right. But let's get the more important walking sound in. So that one's another similar technique. So in the scenario where we're walking, we can just do walk audio.play. And what we can do is we can click our walk sound down here in the bottom left and come up to import and set it to loop. So if we click re-import, now it is a looping sound. So if I start playing the sound, you see that it's automatically playing. And so it'll just keep playing forever. So what's great about that is then we can just set up a simple system where if walk audio.playing is false, walk audio.play. And then in other scenarios where we're not walking, we can just set it to stop. So if we're in the air, walk audio dot stop. And if we're on the floor and our X input is 0, walk audio dot stop. And you can see our game really is starting to feel a lot more alive. So you can experiment and you can come up with your own ways to do this stuff. But this is the basics of how you can implement sound into your Godot games. But let's show you one last thing that is really important for making your game feel good. And once you notice this trick, you will notice it in every video game you play from now on. And that is a little bit of randomization in the pitch. So let's come up to our jump. This is perhaps the best one to demonstrate this with. Every time we jump, it plays our sound effect at this pitch scale, right? Which I set to 1.5. But what if we set it so every time we jumped, it did a random pitch scale? So here's how we do that. We do jump audio, and we set our dot pitch scale. We're going to set it to a random number between a range. So we're going to do rand f range. And so what this stands for is a random float value. So a float is this very specific type of number. So there's like integers, right? Like 0, 1, 2, 3. And a float is a computer way of storing any value that has a decimal, basically. And so it can be any number. We'll give it 2 numbers, and it will generate a random number in that range. So we could have it be anywhere from 1.2 to, let's do 1.8. So we'll do a pretty large scale here. And if we play our game now, you'll notice each time we jump, it's just slightly different. So it's randomizing the pitch, right? And that's great because you'll be hearing the same sound effects over and over and over in a game. And it's the slight variations that make it not totally mind-numbing. So if you ever played Stardew Valley and you like sold a bunch of seeds all at once and it's like pop, 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 that's exactly what's happening. If you're picking up, blocks in Minecraft, it's the same sort of variation there as well. So that's a really useful hack I recommend you all learn. But now let's do a little bit of juice. So right now our character is pretty constant, but one thing I like is a little bit of squash and stretch. So here's what that looks like. Basically, when we jump, I want our character to squeeze a little bit vertically. So this is like a very modern thing to do because you couldn't do this with old pixel art. But what I could do is I could make our character compress. And so this is a good way to demonstrate the animation player node. So let's go ahead and do that. So as a child of our raccoon, I'm going to add an animation player. And this is a very different type of animation in that you can animate nodes. So this is what that looks like. So if I click animation and I do new, you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call this jump squish. Right? So here is a timeline. So this is time. And by default, it's set to a 1 second animation. You can choose how long this animation is here, and you can choose whether or not it's looping here. I'm going to drag this magnifying glass so I can change the scale of the timeline. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to animate the property of our animated sprites scale. So here's how we'll do that. So if I click on the animation sprite, it'll actually bring us to the sprite frames 2D. But if I click back to the animation, now you'll see what we're doing here, which is that we have all these keyframes we can now adjust. So the keys that I want to adjust is I want to adjust our scale. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click this chain, which separates these two, because before, if you adjust one variable, it adjusts them equally, but now I can really adjust each scale on their own, which is great. So what I'm going to do is, because I want this to play when I jump, what I want to imagine is our character squishes horizontally and then jumps up vertically, right? So they're going to squish on the x-axis, and then they're going to squeeze upward on the y-axis. So that's what we're going to do. So this is my default variables for scale. They're 2 and 2. I'm going to change this to something like 2.2, and I'll subtract that amount from the other one. So let's do 1.8. And now I'll hit the keyframe button, and I'll click leave this on, and I'll click use Bezier curves. If I hit create, now in our animation player we have these new little dots here on our player. And so this is our animation. And so if I scroll forward in time, let's say at the 0.2 second mark, I want it to squish the other way. So what I'll do is I'll make this, let's say 2.1, and I'll make this one 1.9. If I'll keyframe that. So now we have this animation where if I play it, shoop, it does that, which is really subtle, right? But trust me, it adds a lot. So we've created a new animation, and because I set up scale with a reset track, it now defaults to these values when we're not doing anything. So I'll come into the reset track and I'll set them to 2. So I click on this, I click on the value, and I set it to 2. So now let's trigger this animation in code. So we have a new node, so let's create a new reference. So at onReady var animation player. And I'm just coming up with whatever variable names I want, but just try and keep it consistent so you can get it right. And it's called animation player here, so I'll put that there. So now what I'll do is, in the same location I'm jumping, I'm going to trigger it to play that animation. So I'll do anim player.play in parentheses, and you can see the options here. Let's play jump squish. So let's play our game and see what happens. So now if I jump, you see we get that little squish, right? And that does a lot. But what happens sometimes is that because our animation is 1 second long, if you look, see, it happens all in this first frame. What I should do is I should change my animation length to be the length of the animation. So let's do that here. So we click this and we set it to 0.2. And now our animation is this long. So if we run the game, it'll happen every single time we jump. And that adds a lot of character. Just that little bit of squeeze, right? And that's something that you couldn't get if you did this game at a lower resolution, right? It's the fact that we're higher that it allows us to squeeze these pixels back and forth. So, but the problem is that we jump, right? And maybe you don't quite notice this, but our character ends up still a little bit vertical. So what I actually might do is I might have the animation be longer and have him go back all the way to 0. So I'll click on the node that I'm editing, and I'll go back to animation, and I'll set the scale, and then I'll click this key, and so now it keyframes back to that. Something didn't happen here. It seems like it's still 2. So I'll adjust it here. Hit enter, and now we're all the way back. But now sometimes, let's say we jump and land within 0.4 seconds. So if we try to play it again, it's already playing, right? So the way that we fix this is we have it play back from the start. So the way you can do that is you can do seek, and you can set it to seek to 0 seconds. So it'll always play the animation back from here, no matter what, every time we jump. Right? So that ensures that the animation always plays from the beginning, no matter how long it is. So that's another way we can add juice. So we've added juice with sound effects. We've added juice with a little squish animation. Now let's add some particles. You can't have juice without particles. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new node to our character. So we'll click plus, and we'll add particles. There's 2 types of particles, CPU and GPU. I always just use CPU. And I'm not really sure why, but they've always been a little bit easier for me to use, and I don't often get in trouble with using them. So now we have our CPU particles, and if you zoom in, you can actually see them where they are. So by default, they're just at 0, 0, which is because it's our character. It's anchored right there in the center of it. So our particles are exactly 1 pixel in scale, which is pretty small. So let's go ahead and fix that. So if we come down here to scale in our particle settings, you can see our scale minimum and maximum. So let's go ahead, and because our character is 2 pixels, let's set our minimum to 2. And then to have some chunkier ones, let's do 4, something like that. So now we have a variety of sizes. If you look, you'll notice some are small and some are bigger. And actually, I want to get pretty chunky with it. So let's go all the way up to like 8, and let's increase this one. All right, so now we have some pretty big boxes. And if you want, you can actually assign a texture to this particle emitter. And so the way you do that is you click drawing and you bring a texture in here. Because I'm making a pixel art game, I actually don't feel like I need to do that. So I'll go ahead and just leave it as is. But I want to make a little smoke trail that runs behind our character when our character is running, right? So let's do that. So by default, it's dropping down pretty quick. I don't think we want that. I want our particles to have way less gravity. So if we come to gravity, you'll see by default it's 980 pixels per second. I think that's a little too high, so I'm going to divide it by 2. So you can just do divide by 2 and hit enter. You can do math in these little slots here, which is very useful. That's still a little too much. So I want it to feel a little floaty. So there we go. It's a little floaty now, because what we're going to do is we're going to add some velocity to it. So here we have velocity minimum and maximum. So let's just do, I don't know, let's try 10. Okay, so not quite a ton. Let's do a little bit more than that. Let's do 50. All right, so here we go. Now we're starting to get something. Let's have a higher max as well. And ooh, we've got some nice variation in here. but they're starting to spread out a little bit. I want it to be kind of like a little more consistent, so we can actually control how many you're emitting. So up here at the top, it's default to 8, but what if we did like 14 or something like that? Okay, that's getting there. Let's go for 20. Yeah, there we go. So we've got a constant sort of spew of particles here. They're all facing the same way. I think it's kind of fun to have some variation. So let's do a maximum angle of 360 degrees. And now they can be any which angle they want. And we can actually add some angular velocity. So the minimum could be, let's do 10 minimum. Or actually, let's do anywhere from -15 to +15. So they could be spinning any which way now. If you look, they have some of them have a slight little rotation to them, which I think adds a lot. But the problem is that some of them, you'll notice, they get spewed out and they just completely disappear and evaporate. And I want them to kind of fade out. So what we can do is we can come here to scale and create a scale amount curve. So if I click in this and do this new curve, you can see here we have our scale. And by default, it's set to 0. So our particle has just disappeared. If I left click, I can add a variable for the smallest size our particle will ever be and the largest size. So we'll have it start at 0, and then at 1/4 of its life, we'll have it reach its maximum size. So if we come and look now, we can see that they grow in size and then they reach their peak. Let's have it continue until 3/4 of its life, and then it will shrink back down. So now we've got a really nice particle system. It grows in size and then it shrinks down. And you can play with this curve a little bit to try and get something more natural. This is usually kind of what I go for. And so now our particles spew out and then they shrink down. If you want your particles to last longer, you can come up here to time and you can adjust this. So let's do a little bit longer. Let's do like 1.2. And so now we've got a pretty good particle system. Only thing and you can just keep tweaking these variables until you get sort of what you want. And just play around with it for a bit. The goal is kind of just to have fun here. But yeah, it's great. So now we just got to make sure that it emits from our character's feet when they're running. So I'm going to bring our particles down. So you can either edit its position here with the transform, or you can use the move tool. And if you move and hold shift, it'll lock it to either straight down or straight left or right. So I'll hold shift and I'll bring it down to, let's do about here. And that should be good. And let's have visibility. Let's have it show behind the parent. So it'll appear behind our raccoon here. And that looks pretty good. And so now we just need to make it face the direction that our character is moving and only appear when our character is on the floor and is running. So let's come down to animate and let's adjust it here. So, oh boy, this is starting to get messy. So if your code starts to look like this, I highly recommend taking some time and adding some comments. But I'm familiar enough with my messy brain that I'm just gonna dive in here. So here we've got if our character is on the floor, this is when we want to turn on, and we're walking, this is if we're not walking. So I'm gonna write and this is if walking. So here we've got all this stuff. So we'll just set it so that our particle animation plays. So we got to get our reference in here. So I'm going to double click on these particles and I'm going to call them walk. I'll call them dust particles. We'll create our reference. So @onReadyVar dust particles. And then we come down and we can just set our particles to play. So again, this is, pretty much like everything else we've done. So we just do our reference and we'll just set it to play. Or actually, I believe the term it uses is emitting. So we can set it emitting to true. Or I think there's two ways. I think you can do it like this as well. So let's turn off our particles emitting. So click on the particles and make sure emitting is set to off. And so if we run our game now, let's see if it turns on when I start walking. No. Okay, so emit is not a term. So we'll do emitting set to true. So let's run our game again. We can see that by starting to walk, we turn them on. Okay. So that's great. Now we just got to turn them off when we're not walking. So if we're in the air, we can set our particles emitting to false. And if we're not walking, we can also set our particles emitting to false. So let's test this out. Yep, so it only appears when we walk, which is exactly what we want. So now let's set them to face the direction that we're moving. We'll come here, so where we set it to emit, and we'll set the direction of them. So we can do the so in this one we don't have an option for flip H like we did for the character. So we'll just use this scale cheat here. So we'll set the dustparticles.scale.x. We'll set it equal to input vector.x. So again, this part will break if you're using a joystick or any form of input that isn't binary, but we're using a keyboard here, so this is fine. Basically, the scale will be whatever our input vector is. So if we're walking to the right, our input vector will be +1, and so our scale will be +1. So actually, what we want it to be is the negative input vector, right? So if we're walking to the right, we want it to shoot out to the left, so we want a -1 scale. If we're walking to the left, we want it to be the opposite. So, alright, so let's test this out and see if this works. So it's shooting out to the left, shooting out to the right. Alright, now the only thing I might tweak last about this is I want it to appear on top of the terrain. And so the reason that it's appearing behind is because actually our entire raccoon is behind the terrain here. So I'm going to drag our raccoon beneath the tile map, not into the tile map as a child, but beneath. And so now if we run it, our raccoon will appear on top, and so will its particles. And you can see that these 3 tweaks we made, right? We added sound, we added a little bit of squish, and we added some particles, and our game really just is coming to life. So it doesn't take that much to really to add to your game to make it feel real. And so if you want to take a look at examples of juice, I highly recommend playing my game Smack Monkey, which is free on itch.io. I'll put the link in the description. And you'll see that it's a very simple game, but there's a lot of places in which I added as much juice as possible to try and make it feel really dynamic and really make the player feel like they're interacting with it. Because if you're not having sort of intrinsic systems in your game that let the player know that they're interacting with them, then it doesn't feel like anything substantial. But it's the juice. It's the small touches that really add personality and life to your game. So play around with it. You could add particles that appear when you're in the air to sort of track your player's position in the air. You could set up particles for when you land. If your character, let's say, has a walk versus a run when you're holding shift, you could have different particles for that. But yeah, sound design, particles, and animation are all sort of the best ways to make your game feel juicy and make it feel real. So yeah, this was the episode on Juice. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.